All right, great. Hello, my name's Thomas Mical. I'm the Dean of the School of Art and Architecture at Jindal Global University. I'm American, as you can tell. I was born and raised in Chicago. I've studied architecture all my life. I have degrees from Harvard, a PhD from Georgia Tech. I've taught architecture in 8 countries, and I've been in India about a year and a half. I'm here to talk about the architecture program, the Bachelor of Architecture in particular, and why it's not for everybody. So if you'll bear with me, we'll take questions as we go, but I want to get some images up because we're a very visual field, and I usually like to explain ideas by showing the pictures that represent them. So if we can see this. So what I'd like to talk about is why the Bachelor of Architecture degree isn't for everyone. And the intention of this is to point out that there's some unique characteristics and qualities to this new degree program in this new school that will be hopefully of interest to a great number of people inside and outside the profession of architecture. The program is relatively new. It's about 2 years old, and it's quite experimental. And we have a very large range of different ways of teaching and experiencing and learning that is quite different from the standard ones you might find at other universities. The school itself is a couple of years old and is growing very rapidly, almost doubling student numbers each year. And we're very selective about the students we like to bring into the program. We would prefer to have students that have imagination, some curiosity, willing to ask hard questions, have some interest in how things come together and how things can be changed. If you're the sort of student who imagines a world that could be a better place, or has a particular strong interest or issue of something that needs to be transformed in the world that we live in, the built environment or natural environment, you're the kind of student we'd probably want to have around. We have a lot of different opportunities and a lot of ideas and incredible flexibility in the curriculum. And we don't expect people to be good at everything. We expect them to try everything and learn in that process. I want to talk a little bit about architecture education. If I go way back, the image on the right you can see is a sculpture I worked on with some of my friends when I was in my bachelor's program. We developed a expertise in making things, in this case welding, and built a 4-story tower as one of our design build projects for our final studio and architecture school, and attached it to the building as an exhibition space. On the left, you can see some sculptural works that talk about how things come together, get pulled apart, and brought back together again in different combinations. Sculptural work by Juan Ortega up top called Cosmic Thing, which is an axonometric exploded view of a very commonplace Volkswagen Beetle you would find in Mexico. And lower part is a moving sculpture by Jean Tinguely, a very big inspiration for me as a student. So when I studied architecture, I didn't actually know what I was getting into. The beginning of the architecture program was quite mysterious and very difficult to understand. And by the time I was in 3rd year, it made perfect sense to me. And by the time I finished my master's degree, people were offering me jobs quite literally all over the world. So you expect a very steep learning curve and expect to try and experience a great many things that you will probably have never tried before in your earlier education. The Bachelor of Architecture degree program is a 5-year degree, and that's actually pretty standard, not just for India, but all Commonwealth and all countries around the world. You have to study architecture for 5 or 6 years to become an architect in most places. And in India, once you complete the accredited Council of Architecture approved Bachelor of Architecture degree at any of the Indian universities, that is also your license to practice. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a real steep learning curve, and there's great opportunities to develop and to customize your education, particularly the way we've set it up here at Jindal University. Probably one of the most difficult transitions for new students is to experience how the teaching process works. The first thing I should tell people, and this will scare some parents, we don't actually have any final exams. We tried to use a very different type of learning that's based on exploring, on the idea of trial and error, of learning in groups, doing group projects, testing things out, building prototypes, refining them. There's a whole variety and a whole range of different heuristic or directed approaches towards problem solving. And in the more advanced courses, you don't do problem solving, you do problem finding, trying to ask what the right question is before you try to find solutions to it. So we call this an overarching term for this is experiential learning. It's the same way you might learn a language or might learn to ride a bike or play a musical instrument. It's kind of an immersion in the process of doing, as opposed to simply memorizing something and giving it back. Because we don't do that in our program at all. We expect you to try and to experience a great variety of different things as a continuous growth curve for your own intellectual project. The other part of the program that's relatively unique is design and social context. And I'm just using this as a descriptor to talk about the fact that we have a lot of people in the program who are very interested in particular aspects of the built environment and the world, both the natural world and I guess you could say the unnatural, the design world. Increasingly, buildings are starting to act more like gardens, gardens are starting to act more like machines, and we live in a society increasingly where media starts to be the dominant form of change and discourse too. So we expect our students to be a little bit curious about everything. It's okay to be a specialist, and you'll usually get a job based on specialization, but we also like students to have that kind of general curiosity, entrepreneurial spirit, the ability to ask hard questions, and also the ability to work with others and perhaps learn how to persuade them. Because some of the things you learn in architecture school are not simply things that are on tests or things that are in books. A lot of it is learning through experience and then reflecting on it, drawing upon your own experience as a way to build your own set of knowledge or expertise. And we often do this in relationship to the social conditions. Historically, architecture was always called the social art. And some people think architecture is a science. I've taught at universities like that. Some think it's an art, and I've taught at universities like that. And some think it's a type of engineering. I've also taught at universities like that. But actually, architecture is kind of in between all of them. And many of you will think that you have to be fantastic at mathematics. I think it's a bit of a misrepresentation. I was pretty good at math through high school, but not brilliant. And I wound up doing really well in architecture and getting 4 degrees in it. I've worked in professional offices, working on skyscrapers and airports as an architect in Chicago, around the world. And I've only had to use a little bit of calculus to check some engineers' calculations. Most of the time, what I use is creative thinking and critical thinking. What are 10 different ways to do this, and which one fits the criteria of either efficiency, sustainability, cost effectiveness, or ethical impact? As a consequence of this, there's no real right or wrong answers. If you're the sort of student who's interested in exploring, finding your own voice, learning how to, in a way, develop your own style, and to develop your own way of thinking and seeing the world, you'll probably be much more successful than students who simply memorize a test, answer, and give it back. Because we want you to learn things on your own. The real reason is an architecture professional career lasts about 40 to 60 years, and the education's 5 years. So the most important thing we can teach you is not architecture. The most important thing we can teach you is how to ask questions about architecture that you can find your own answers to. Let me talk a little bit about the campus. This is a view of one of the internal courtyards. It's organized. Sometimes it feels a bit like an ocean liner. It's a gated community. It's quite private. Students live on campus. Faculty live on campus. I'm not the only professor who complains about the noise at night from all of the concerts, music, movies, dance festivals, and all that other stuff that goes on. I actually don't know how students manage to find time to study because of all the extracurricular activities, but it's quite vibrant, except now because of the shutdown. One of the things that's happening on campus too is it feels like a North American campus to me because there's a lot of students' interaction and exchange through the public spaces and through the hallways and the libraries and the corridors, the coffee shops and the sports fields. A lot of students will meet people from other disciplines and interact with them in a way that wouldn't happen in a much larger university. It's a very private place, and it's a place where people are free to speak their minds, and people often do. It's also well organized in terms of the French architect who's designed this space. They have a great degree of flexibility, and as you can see here, there's a close relationship between structural systems, the performance spaces of the auditoriums, and the introduction of landscape. So there's an integrated environment, so the building itself gives you some examples. The architecture school has its own separate building adjoining this, which has a particular ethos. It's a bit of a workshop, and it feels much more like a collective space. Probably one of the more interesting things about this school, too, that makes it different and makes it a type of place that not everyone can come to, has to do with the diversity of the faculty. Jindal Global University is a global university. Approximately 18% of the faculty are international citizens or internationally trained, and almost all of our faculty have a bachelor's degree in India in architecture, and then a master's or further degrees from other universities, often in other countries. I think I'm the only one here who doesn't have an Indian architectural degree, but I have 4 American ones, so maybe that's okay. The faculty are quite curious, they're quite creative, and they're quite contentious, actually. They will ask you a lot of questions, and they will expect you to keep challenging yourself. And they do this quite often, formally and informally in the program. And we plug in visitors. We usually have 1 guest lecturer a week, and we have at least 1 workshop with a practitioner. And we have internships, but because our studio projects are also done often on real sites, you get a lot of practical experience during your education, not simply just at the end like in other schools. It also creates a situation where all the different courses in many ways give you some expertise in some aspects of understanding architecture. But you have to pull it together yourself in studio. So studio is a sort of place where we don't expect the projects to all look the same. That would be an engineering school. In design schools, we expect all the projects to look different. And as a consequence, we like students who are interested in exploring and trying things out and willing to take some risks. Because if we have that, and you can see the faculty model that in their own teaching and research, if you're willing to take some risks, you're able to grow a lot faster. And the world really needs a lot of help right now, particularly in the aspect of what's called built environment. The design studio is a type of education unlike any other. It's a bit of cooking, it's a bit of creative writing, it's a bit of music education. It's hard to describe without going through it, the actual cooking process, and I'm using that in abstraction, of how you actually learn and integrate these different types of knowledge. In the design studio, here they're called ateliers, a French term, there's a group of students all working on similar projects at the same time in close proximity, learning in a group, sometimes doing group projects, but often doing their work in parallel. There's plug-in experience. Experts come in, visiting architects, other people from around the world will come in and discuss their projects and give them inspiration and ideas. And as a consequence of that, it's quite a lively place. The studio is something that is often studied as a form of learning, because unlike a lecture class or say a webinar, about 80% of what you learn in the studio sticks with you for the rest of your life. And I can remember every single studio I've taken 13 and taught 50. I can remember every single one, the projects we had, which students worked on which aspects of the design process, and I can remember what went well and what didn't go wrong. It's a type of learning that's quite profound because you really engage all of your senses and all of the aspects of your intellect, both conscious and unconscious, in developing solutions to problems that sometimes are invisible to other people. So in a way, it might give you a little bit of a superpower too, the ability to bend reality as the consequence of this Bachelor of Architecture degree. You can see some images. When I first came, I took some pictures of the students learning by trial and error, constructing a brick wall. They would go and visit sites in Old Delhi, I believe, and study some 600-year-old brick buildings. They would visit brick kilns to see how bricks are made. And instead of doing drawings to hand off for someone else to build, they learned through practical experience how to actually put a brick wall together. If you've never done that before, it's actually harder than it looks. And I don't mean that in terms of its density. I mean the process of getting all of the wet and dry components together is a little bit tricky, as you can see. But again, experiential learning, often group-based learning, and under some nominal supervision. So teaching in architecture is more like coaching, actually, than anything else. On the right, you can see some brainstorming, and this is the first part of every good design project. It's one of the secrets of design schools that the good projects often start off as a list, and a list of qualities, not just a list of outcomes. How does it feel is just as important as how much does it cost. And we use this a lot when we're developing design projects and trying to understand how they work with different aspects of society. These are some quick snaps from a trip. I did this with another co-instructor, Ishita Jain. We took all of the second-year students up to a foothill town and historic preservation site and looked at different ways to revitalize their public space and their water infrastructure. So the water, the pond, the different wells, and how to make public space more accessible to people. So we did this as a quick one-week project. Everyone came up, stayed in the local places, had lunch with the local people, interacted, took a lot of diagrams, drawings. We did comic books, storyboards, films, animations, almost any media you could think of to try to communicate our ideas and suggestions, and came up with a huge list of things that the community could do. We also didn't do the expert thing and come in and say, you guys should do this. We tried to work with the community, not instead of for the community, and we tried to give them a range of options and let them decide through a democratic process what they thought was appropriate. So that was, I think, a pretty significant one-week experience. And for me, it was quite significant too. I learned a great deal about everyday life in the foothills of the Himalayas. We have a list of minors. This list is a little bit long, but we have about 8 minors now officially that you can study. This is the corrected list: liberal arts, business studies, legal studies, government, journalism, environment, economics, spatial analysis. And these are intended for every student who does the 5-year Bachelor of Architecture to have a disciplinary minor as a point of difference. This is what will allow you to get a more competitive job and allow you to invent new ways to do architecture, because once you have a major and a minor, that is to say, once you have a first language and second language, you're your own force multiplier. You're the person who can bring new things to the profession and see new ways of asking questions and push things in that direction. I also joke with students who come here. I said we keep the architecture school small. We try not to take more than 40 students for our 14 faculty. So staff-student ratios are very, very small compared to big assembly-type factory schools because we follow the North American model. We know every student's name, we know which ones are vegans, they know all of our politics and stuff. It's quite a close community. But one of the things that happens is because the law school and other professional schools, government, business management are so large, architecture students often make friends in these other fields. And not only is there a chance when they graduate to have their friends hire them to build their own houses, but it allows you to have a better understanding of the world. It's not simply based on mathematics, but on broader concerns around society, maybe sustainability, possibly social justice, but also understanding how the parts fit together, both the physical parts and the social parts. And as a consequence of that, we have some pretty lively discussions and quite a few faculty coming from around, currently around India, but increasingly around the world, coming to see what we're doing and to participate in this experiment. I could talk all day about career options. Because I've taught for 30 years, I've taught about 4,000 architecture students around the world. Most have gone on to become architects. Quite a few are CEOs of their companies. Some are technologists. Some have gone into project management. One's an escalator consultant. Quite a few have pilot's licenses. Some have formed fashion design companies, film design companies. One's become a mayor of a town. And I even have some colleagues who started a surrealist press and formed a punk band too. So once you have an architecture degree, in many ways, you can practice architecture, but you can also design everything else. From teacups to cities, you're empowered to make new provisional solutions to the increasing problems of the world. So anything that's a wicked problem, whether it has to do with water security or the safety of streets for women at night, or the idea of trying to create buildings that in many ways can improve the world simply by existing. These are the challenges that students increasingly are challenged with in studios. It's not like we're trying to get you to come up with a solution that is preconceived. We try to give you an open-ended question so you can find your own voice and find your own solutions. And this is what makes you a valuable professional. We would prefer that the Bachelor of Architecture graduates, once you finish the degree, are capable of directing themselves and asking questions and don't simply have to sit there and wait to be told what to do, but take the initiative and tell the world what solutions it needs. So the career options for architecture are quite fascinating, and everyone I know that practices architecture does many other things too. Everything from working with communities, volunteering at hospitals, sitting on boards for different cultural institutions. And about a third of the architects I know are actually really good at music or cooking. I'm not sure why. And we want to cultivate your own curiosity into a range of expertise. Just a quick provocation. If you look at this image, this is a type of data representation. It might just look like some sort of quilt pattern or test screen, but it's actually a chart that maps the temperature, the mean average temperature by color across Europe for the last 100 years. So this is a way of showing that global warming is a mathematical fact. It also is a way of showing how architects think, taking abstract data and turning it into some sort of visual or spatial representation, and then taking that another step into the realms of how can you transform the world? How can you take what you've already got or inherited and make it into something better? This is a hypothetical project by Znara, which is a firm in Dubai, and it's an attempt to solve some of the air pollution problems in Delhi. And one of the things that they've done is they've developed these technologies exist, skyscrapers that can eat smoke, pull out heavy metals from the clouds and the air, and purify the environment. So we often think of buildings not simply as objects or as real estate. We like to think of buildings as part of a larger ecosystem, physical or built ecology, as something that contributes to the wider society and does many things at once. The secret of design school is that a solution solves a problem. A good solution solves multiple problems simultaneously. So we're often looking for those convergences or those harmonies between different questions that come up with a good all-around result. It's also helpful if the projects are quite poetic, inspiring, and have a certain high-tech feel, at least in the places that I work. We're just introducing now for people who are interested in architecture and built environment, but perhaps don't want to take the NATA test or don't have a background in chemistry, but still want to participate in this. We have a new degree program in interior design, which includes everything from interiors to working with the interior-exterior transitions, furniture design, and thinking about social arrangements and the interiors of housings in particular, which is a bit of a discounted degree. And it's a very popular one. I know quite a few people, and I've worked in interior design firms too. Usually they have architects and interiors working together on complex projects and modifying and renovating the existing fabric of the world to improve it, to get the quality of life and the quality of the environment to improve using often sustainable technologies and new and experimental approaches, but also opening up spaces, and sometimes by removing things that are problems, you can improve the environment too. I'm going to close my quick presentation by showing an important drawing by Jeremy Till, a British scholar acquaintance of mine who's taught many of my former students. And this is a drawing, as you can see, of a meal. On the right is the way the architect would lay out the drawing with all the knives and forks and plates and everything perfectly arranged before the meal happens. And that's a type of aerial plan drawing. On the left, you can see how the meal finishes. So it's almost like a before and after. And you can, from the image on the left, you can start to read backwards and see how certain things have moved and changed and how the meal happened. The middle drawing is where we like architecture, interiors, and other designers to be. That's almost like a stop motion where every 10 minutes, the drawing where the plates, the chairs, everything is located. The people are missing from the drawing, but you see traces of the people through the movement of these different systems. So even something as subtle and simple as a dining table contains within it aspects of the food, agriculture, industrial production. It has aspects of social relationships. It has politics. Almost everything that people are talking about now, particularly under quarantine, is often focused on the dining table itself, and all of the gifts that come and appear there too, increasingly are held to be quite valuable in this time. So we want to just remind people too that when architects do drawings, they don't just draw what needs to be built. They often draw processes, and these processes tell us how to go about building in the future. So it's very important for us to understand how things move and change and how different things influence each other so that we can design the world in a much better way. That's it in terms of my quick presentation. I think I'm right at the amount of time I was supposed to speak. And I think at this point, I'm going to jump back to my webcam and see if anyone has any questions. Okay. Right. It looks like a few of you are still here. Are there any questions? I think I see one coming through. Okay, one question by Akash Kapoor. It's coming through. And it said, how can we improve architectural aptitude for the entrance exam? Within India, architecture aspirants are expected to take a standardized test called MAT. Many people go to coaching centers, I believe, to improve their work on this. The components having to do with chemistry, math, and physics is a separate process. And the entrance exam is geared towards particularly visual representation and drawing. Drawing is actually quite important. You don't have to draw well, to be honest. You just have to draw well enough. In the same way, you don't have to be brilliant at math. You just have to be good enough. Because the real challenge, I think, is actually, what do you draw and how do you? We have quite a few faculty in first year that work very closely in the representation class to improve people's representation skills. So for us, drawing is just one thing that we do. We can use cameras, we can use maps, we can use a whole variety of different ways of capturing information and turning that into hypothetical designs. It's very important, I think, also for people who are interested in studying architecture to keep an open mind. Everything you've learned in high school, and even the techniques to pass a test in high school, will not be as helpful as curiosity and stick-to-itness. They always told us that the students who work on their projects consistently are always the ones who come up with the most interesting projects. So even in our representation course, we encourage students, by the end of the first year, you'll do dozens of drawings, have written some essays, done some blog entries, built quite a few models, have a lot of photographs, made some walls, visited some historic sites, talked to some experts. The amount of things you do in your first year will probably exceed all the different types of learning you've studied in 4 or 5 years of high school. So you've got to be open to it. And that's not something that can be tested. The test is basically a minimum threshold to see if you are going to have a chance of succeeding. But what makes this program unique is, the reason we don't take everyone, we also do an interview. We do an interview with every potential student, and we try to see how you think of what makes you unique. We look for original answers. We look for those traits and characteristics and qualities that let us understand how you think as a person. And for us, that's the most important material. So being okay at math and being okay at drawing is fine. Having that curiosity about the world, or being curious about how things pull apart and pull back together, is just as valuable. The next question I've got from Vishnu: how does our school help students to be scholar practitioners? And that's actually a very important question too. When I was an undergraduate student, I started to take theory courses in the 3rd year and had my first research writing class actually in the design studio in 4th year. And that was a bit late. In our school, we have students thinking, reading, critiquing, analyzing, documenting, and proposing within the first year. And we often work on a variety of media, as I said. We don't do as many formal research papers as we do analytic papers, analytic pieces, you include graphics in that. Scholars and practitioners are like a Venn diagram. The people who practice architecture are usually practicing based on their education and their knowledge, and they're expected to stay current on current developments. Scholars are people who go back and help to understand where the profession has been and where the profession is going, and they both have their place in architectural education. In most schools, they want to see an equal mix of architects who teach and people who teach architecture. And as a consequence, you get a mixture of practitioners and people working from knowledge and education systems. And because our faculty have studied quite a bit around the world, there's no one dominant way of answering the question, even proposing a question. So we try to model that scholar practitioner overlap, even in the faculty presentations and comments. The next question by Sakshi, how is the B.Arch program different from other B.Arch programs in the country? I've taught at a couple of the schools in India and around the world, quite a few around the world. And I would say that what makes this place distinct is the small classes. Everyone gets to know everyone. We focus very much, like coaches, we focus very much on individual training and development. When I went to university, I was one student out of 40,000, and all I was a student number. Here on campus, I see students and they see me all the time. We wind up, sometimes in the cafeteria or library together. They come up and often will ask advice, and then they'll explain things to me like how the volley works and how goalie works, and things that as a foreigner I'm not quite good on. And as a consequence, there's probably a very healthy support network. There's a close relationship between the people in the program. And the students in the program are also very close. So our second years have been mentors to a lot of the first year students as well. And as a consequence, there's a much more integrated sense of community. It also helps to have our own building and a very close relationship between our program and some of the other programs on campus. So it's very, very hard for people to get lost. Even if you're late to class, I used to go and grab some students before class to make sure they showed up on time. People are hostels around the way. Because we all live on campus, it's also very easy for people to support each other. So if someone has a problem or emergency, other people can chip in and help them too. So there's a very, very strong set of ties and connections between people. Next question, can you get internships in the US after completing the B.Arch? Hypothetically, it's possible. The US visa regulations are quite complicated. And it actually is easier for me to find some of my American friends here practicing in India and get some internships with them, particularly if someone is licensed in the United States under the American Institute of Architects and they're practicing in India, they can still supervise you towards the licensure process in the United States until the visa is So there's a way to do that. We have students, the first year, every student that wanted an internship got one. We had a small class, but we had actually more internship spots than we had students. And this year, we have a lot of students who are interested in doing internships. But we also try to do live projects in each of the design studios. So in most B.Arch curriculums, I understand it to be that you'll find a semester with an internship with one firm. Our students here have the opportunity of interning in almost all of the semesters and between semesters. But particularly during the semesters, they work on projects, often with real clients and real sites, so they get a lot more practical experience. And to be honest, they get more political connections that way, which is how I got all of my jobs too. In terms of trips to the United States, I am a regular citizen. I've taken students from 4 different countries on study abroad trips to the United States, and I'm happy to do that too. Getting internships because it's employment in the US is a little bit trickier than getting a tourist visa. And on a tourist visa, I always have students bring their resumes and portfolios and drop them everywhere we visit. We do a lot of office visits besides visiting projects and museums. And sometimes that leads to future employment opportunities. To be honest, if you want to practice in the United States, they usually expect a master's degree. And because if you come to Jindal and do a B.Arch and then do a master's in the US or UK, it's very easy to get licensed in those countries too. So that's actually been a pretty common pattern. And a lot of those practitioners will work in those countries now, I've noticed, for 5, 10 years, and now they're starting to come back to India because they start to see India's economy doing better than some of those countries right now too. So it's called Jindal Global University because a lot of the faculty are international, the teaching style is very international, but maybe the expectation is that you will be able to, or empowered to practice around the world, but certainly starting off your education and getting a North American style education here in India. Next question we have by Vishnu. Are classes assigned to students, or do students choose the classes they attend? This is a brilliant question, actually, because this is something as a faculty we debate all the time. There are some people in the university, and there are some people in the architectural profession that think that every single morsel and every single idea should be taught in a rote consecutive sequence. And to me, that sounds like kind of a boring high school approach. So most of us hate that. What we really like is people to come out and to challenge us. And the courses are designed so they cover different areas of knowledge. But again, because we don't use exams, there's no preconception that there's a certain quantity of data you have to memorize. If anything, memorization is going to be your least developed skill as you move through architectural education. Thinking on your feet, improvising, taking chances is much more valuable and much more significant in terms of your ability to learn to teach yourself. You know, one of the jokes is that by the time you graduate from a 5-year degree program, your laptop will be obsolete. You don't want your education to be obsolete too. So, we try to do very hard conversations on flexibility. Students can pick their own minors, and this is actually a point of distinction too. Not everyone can do the B.Arch because a lot of schools will teach you the basics of architectural practice. Our school and a couple of other progressive schools in other countries are trying to get students to rethink fundamental questions so they can change the profession. It's not simply follow, but be leaders. And to do that, you have to be comfortable taking chances. Next question, do you think it is better to study architecture outside of India? Complicated question, because if you study outside of India for your bachelor's, it's very difficult to get a license in India afterwards. The more common technique I've mentioned is to do a Bachelor of Architecture in India, which qualifies you to practice in India, and then to do a master's in the international schools are often held in high regard. And most people will work there for a couple of years and then practice. I had a student from China that studied with me in the US and then worked in New York City for 5 years, got his license, got a master's from Columbia. Then he went back to China, inherited his father's firm, and was doing huge projects around the world. This is actually more common as a career. You often do your undergraduate in India, your master's in another country. The most popular ones are US, UK, Canada, Australia, basically the Commonwealth countries, English speaking. And Indian degrees are increasingly recognized. Jindal's lucky now too because they are QS ranked universities, something that's very rare in India. And so that makes it easier for their degrees to be accepted in more competitive universities in other countries. Jindal's also been identified as an institution of eminence, so we're in the process of becoming free of some of the older legacies of the standardized education, so we'll become even more experimental and more global over time as the school evolves. But so far, it's been a pretty exciting ride, and things keep changing quickly in India. I'm still getting used to that. So we expect our students to have a little bit of resilience and certainly be willing to take some chances in the short term to be successful in the long term. Okay, next question, Ishan. What advice do you have if someone is confused between taking a Bachelor of Architecture and Bachelor of Design careers? When I was an undergraduate, we didn't actually get a choice. Our first year, architecture, landscape, urban design, building construction, we all had to take the same classes the first year. And it was only our second year we could pick which major we wanted. That's very different than the Indian model. You have to know what you want before you start. As a consequence of that, people would kind of, after the first year of that, say, oh, I really like this project, I didn't like that one. And it'd be easier for them to decide. But this is more of a North American. I think probably the two biggest differences are architecture education, because it's a regulated profession, has a lot of required technical classes and certainly expectations in terms of a significant amount of credit hours and work experience and things of that nature. The new interiors program is intended to work more across different types of the spatial arts and spatial practices. It's in many ways geared less towards making buildings and more towards thinking about environments, whether it's interior design, landscape, adaptive reuse, and historic preservation projects, thinking about transforming existing sites or leftover spaces into something. The two biggest distinctions in other countries for that is it tends to be that people who are better at math go into architecture, and people who are more into creative sides will often go into interiors. But I've worked in architecture firms with people with interiors degrees. I've worked in interiors with people with architecture degrees. So there's a bit of a similarity there. The difference is the interiors, the program that we're developing right now, will work across a variety of different disciplines. So the interiors plus probably furniture design, exhibition design, or landscape design, working at a variety of different scales. The architecture one is a little more focused, it's longer, and it has more scientific and technical courses as a requirement. So it depends a little bit about your time frame and your attitude. And if you do a bachelor's in design, and I have a bachelor of design, that's considered a pre-professional degree. You can always go and do a master's in architecture somewhere else. I went to Harvard to do mine, and they counted my bachelor of design degree. It's the equivalent of an architecture degree. So the expectation too is that whichever path you pick, by the time you're 40, it won't matter. People barely remember where you went to school. But when you're coming out of high school, all of your parents and all of your future employers want to know exactly where you went and what you studied. They want to see every drawing in your portfolio. They want to know exactly what sort of value you have and can contribute to the world. The next question we have, in what year of the course do we get to choose our specialization if we have a choice? So we have a very common curriculum across the first year that has a great variety of courses. I have no idea how the students pass all of them. It's quite complicated. And I always teach students in first year because for me that's kind of exciting to see the beginning students as the light bulbs go off and they start to see the world in a different way. The flexibility starts in second year because you will start to take electives in your second year. So you get some anywhere from 20 to 40% of your courses each semester are electives. So there's built-in flexibility after the first year, and a lot of students by the end of second year will have started their minor, which is a series of 4 to 6 courses too. Some do law, although to be honest, more students make friends with the law students in the hopes of getting future jobs. People will do things in spatial analytics, liberal studies, and humanities is also very popular. Social sciences is increasing in popularity. And it depends. So, like I said, there's 10 minors that you can choose right now. So that flexibility is built in through the program so that each semester, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year of the Bachelor of Architecture, you get to take some electives. It's not like high school or other places where there's a prescribed list and you can only take that. In some ways, you can customize it with a great deal of flexibility. And the only thing to keep in mind is every class is different, and so you're learning different things. It's not like learning how to fly a plane for college. It's like learning how to build a bike, build a kayak, build an air balloon, build a monorail train, and then learn how to operate. It feels more like that. So there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing things, and you get exposed to them. And some things you'll do really well, and some you won't. And that's actually okay. We don't expect people to be perfect at everything. We expect them to try it. I've been asked to talk a little bit about some of those recent rankings. The rankings of the university, Jindal Global University was broken into the top 700 around the world, so that means it's in the top 2% of international universities. So it's competitive with even some of the schools in the United States and that too. And the QS rankings go up and down each year, and the more established programs, they start to become a legacy. What that means is Jindal Global University, as a QS ranked university, has international recognition. That means it makes it easier for the mobility of its graduates to move into master's programs or to get employment in other countries because it's a university with a name and reputation. It's quite surprising that a university could break into that top 800 in 10 years, and even more surprising it happened with the Young Indian University. But it's a private university. It's a very exclusive university in the sense that there's a very strong mission here. There's not a lot of science programs or laboratory-based programs. It's all based on social science, humanities, laws, policies, and imagining the world as a better place. As a consequence of that, the university has a very strong focus on using research and using research on applied things to tie into the teaching. So all people who teach are expected to do research, and often the students will participate in projects that feel more like investigations and simply just mastering some tacit material. The institution of eminence, as I mentioned previously, is an opportunity. There's, I think, only 2 private universities in all of India that have been granted this by the Indian government. It's recognition of a high degree of international reputation and success, and it's a type of academic freedom in the sense that the university can increasingly adjust and modify its program for international collaborations, international placements, and for setting up students to international standards too. So that was a pretty miraculous thing that both of those things have happened in the year that I've been here. And so it means that the future credential of the Jindal degrees will only increase in value over time, and that's been recognized by the Indian government and by international organizations. There's very few architecture schools in India that can claim to be either a QS ranked university or in an institution of eminence. So it's a very, very small club of progressive, forward-looking, and I hope future-oriented universities. If you come to Jindal, you'll be part of that upswing. I think I have time for one more question. All right, I think we're good. At this point, I want to thank everyone that's still with us for participating in this, and I hope that if you've heard anything that interests you, please follow up, please contact me, please contact any one of our universities. The best thing actually is to find the JSAA, the student group, find their Instagram page and go through that. That's probably the most lucid explanation of what really goes on in this. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll be doing some workshops over the next couple of weeks for people who are interested in the process of joining the university. If you want to reach out and join one of these workshops, registrations will send invites to everyone who's participated in the seminar. And if you have any questions specifically, something you wanted to discuss that wasn't discussed, I'm happy to talk to people one-on-one, as will the rest of the faculty. Here's another question. How is a B planning degree related to Bachelor of Architecture? A B planning degree is for urban planning and urban design. It tends to be much more about not simply policy, but about working with different forms of infrastructure, governance, even things down to the levels of floor area ratios and ordinances and codes around urban planning. It's not a design degree usually. It's much more of a policy. And it tends to be closer to engineering. The Bachelor of Architecture is, as I said, somewhere between science, engineering, and art. The B planning degree is also a professional degree for urban planners and community designers, or town planners, if there's some. So the Bachelor of Architecture is unique as a named degree for the legally protected title of architects, and because the Council of Architecture regulates it, there's a very precise list of expertise and skill that has to be mastered as part of the Bachelor. And if you ask me, I think Bachelor of Architecture is a lot more fun than Bachelor of Planning, but all 4 degrees in architecture, so I'm biased. All right, we are out of questions, and I think some people are already getting hungry. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll have quite a few more webinars coming up, and we have some drawing-based workshops that we'll be offering online starting next week. So please do keep in touch with us if you heard anything that interests you. Thank you.